It's February 12th, 2022. I'm just listening to this through the NFL filter. First, it starts off with telling the NFL story of the players. And it starts off with a man that doesn't look like George Washington. He looks like a different kind of Washington. Then it goes into a spot where it says there was only 2 players, then it went to 4 players, I believe it said. And then it even says that the person who they're mentioning was the inspiration for Toy Story. The name Woody, Woody. Now, how do you fact check that as a couch potato? Because there's no correlation whatsoever between the, there's not even like a tie-in. Because Woody is usually, it's old, like, world, there's separate talk, but there's nothing inside the movie Toy Story that would tie this NFL version of history together. So I'm a little confused how this is possible. And then they talk about how they showed up for work and there were like razor blades and things, and I'm thinking to myself, well, then how did the NFL history go in such a short time frame in an employment ratio from only letting the first 2 on the field or the first 4 on the field to, like, I don't know, more than 50% looks like. How did that turnover or takeover happen exactly? It just seems like there's some backstory nobody's talking about because they're just so pushing the front, shiny, polished story for some reason.
A Super Bowl title. He's now an analyst at ESPN.
I didn't learn about his plaque till probably about a year ago, that this was actually here.
The plaque memorializing Kenny Washington.
I get chills looking at that guy, because when he did...
Now, Washington is a founder president on our monetary system and on the Black Hills Memorial. I'm confused how it was allowed to be a name addressing non-familial members and how that was ever allowed.
was remarkable.
It is definitely a beauty.
Award-winning NFL columnist Bob Glauber teamed up with Johnson to tell the story of Washington and the 3 other men who broke the NFL's color barrier. Their book, The Forgotten First.
Tell me the kind of player that Kenny Washington was.
What?
Out of all the names that they could have been assigned or assigned themselves, why did they choose the name Washington to be in conflict with what current management uses as the name, trademark name, or whatever name, of the land management for the U.S. government here in the interior?
Well, he was the first African-American All-American at UCLA, so let's start there.
He was a great player.
Just to the right, Kenny Washington's getting the ball, fakes the pass, he's going to run with it.
He was a half...
Like, the North American has a Washington already. Why was African American allowed to call itself Washington and be in direct conflict? That's what I don't understand. How do you ever have resolution?
He did most of the running and passing.
How do you keep people safe if you allow these small word wars to continue and to take root and to take hold and confuse and cause larger wars, more dangerous wars?
On his team at UCLA.
Washington played in the same backfield with none other than Jackie Robinson.
Kenny Washington steps back to pass, throws a looper to Jackie Robinson, and it's complete for a first down.
In Washington's senior year, he led the UCLA Bruins to their first undefeated season, including a triumphant final game in 1939 against rival USC at the Coliseum.
And it was his last game. His coach calls him off the field with 15 seconds left. All 103,000 people stand and roar for Kenny Washington because his college career, and really his entire career, he thinks, is completed. And on the same day he walked off this field,
Nobody
the
really
NFL
cares
held
about
its
these
draft.
details.
Same day. Shouldn't they have the fairness of opportunity at home?
Not if it's going to put everybody's life in jeopardy.
Black players to his 1946 Cleveland Browns mate, Woody Strode.
Woody Strode was a really good, they called him ends in those days. He was a wide receiver. He was Keyshawn Johnson. He was Kenny Washington's best friend.
Around that same time,
no
the
idea what
NFL's
that
rival
means.
league,
That's
the AAFC,
like some other
would
language.
Also integrate, with Ohio coaching great Paul Brown signing 2 black players to his 1946 Cleveland Browns squad.
Bill Willis was the first black player at Ohio State, offensive lineman and defensive lineman. Bill Willis was so fast and so quick off the line that the photographers had to adjust their shutter
So
speed.
according to
their
him,
pictures
he's the
wouldn't
first
be blurry.
one. Just
And then
first,
in
number
Motley,
one.
Just a mountain of a man, fullback who played.
What, but he doesn't say what
high
year
school
that
of
was.
Paul Brown. And he lost 3 games in his high school career, all 3 to Paul Brown's Massillon team.
Brown would say in later years he wasn't looking to make civil rights history by adding Willis and Motley to the team.
He did it because he wanted good football players. There was other owners.
Now, I hear the humans speak of this civil rights. I'm just not quite sure, based on what they're showing on teleportation and television in historical context and their facts that they're speaking of, and what is currently in Century 20, Year 22, being portrayed, and the number ratios being so scarily saturated, it's a little confusing how that gigantic paradigm shift happened in the way that they're trying to explain it to my level of couch potato in North America.
Owners prior to that wanted to do it, but they just didn't want to upset the other owners. They wanted to. And he realized that. He was like, yeah, I got to have me something that's going to help.
Now, is that his version, like, trying to psychologically bulldoze and, like, insert forcible touching of situations that some owners really don't want, but then are, like, intimidated into making changes that they're not comfortable with?
It's going to help me win.
It always takes a first.
Yeah, and they ended up going to the Hall of Fame.
The pair won 4 straight AAFC championships in Cleveland on their way to those Hall of Fame careers. In LA, Kenny Washington played just 3 seasons with the Rams before injury and age forced his retirement. Woody Strode, only 1. But he stayed in Hollywood to act.
Now, this is the actual act. And then they try to tie in a Pixar DreamWorks film that has no correlation whatsoever.
Best known for his roles in Spartacus and Westerns. His name, Sheriff Woody! Even the inspiration for Woody in Toy Story.
Woody saves the day again!
But for all the forgotten first, the challenge of that
I don't see the correlation. Is there a backstory? Maybe if they want to tie those in, they want to explain backstory, because otherwise it makes no sense whatsoever.
that first season of pro football was unparalleled. The book shares a previously unpublished interview from Woody.
And this is like such an American thing these days. Like everybody has a book, a CD, a podcast. It's like, what?
Woody Strode, where he lamented, integrating the NFL was the low point in my life. If I have to integrate heaven, I don't want to go.
There was an instance in the first year of the Cleveland Browns where Paul Brown kept Willis and Motley home for a game in Miami because they received death threats.
The opponents, they're sticking razor blades in their gloves, like in their tape, trying to slice them up, stepping on them with their cleats. Who does that?
Yeah.
Like, what?
Anybody interview any coaches that may, or owners that may have had the same level of really scary shakeup in a different side to the story instead of this polished whatever? Just curious, because this seems to be the going thematic I hear over and over and over again, and it just makes me sit at couch potato like detective series, like, wait a minute, there's got to be more to the story, because the numbers and the timeline just don't add up.
Like, what makes you go in the locker room and say, yeah, I'm going to put these razor blades, I'm going to show him?
But what does that say about these four men, that they faced this and still stayed out there and kept playing? Why?
I would say, first of all, it's heart and guts, perseverance. I couldn't do it, but it says a lot about them to be able to do what I would call something for the greater good. You can't tell the story of the...
Oh, that is a coined phrase of, uh-oh.
of the National Football League without telling the story of these four men.
Can't tell your story.
You can't tell my story, countless others.
And it really does need to be told. And these men need to really have a spotlight shined on their contribution to pro sports history, because it is a meaningful one.
And it will sort of tomorrow. None of them are still with us, but their family members will be recognized at the Super Bowl tomorrow. And the LA City Council has declared tomorrow Kenny Washington Day. Find the book, find the stories. We need to talk about them.
Proud of Keyshawn.
We will be right back.
So now they've declared on an actual calendar a false king, with visual interpretation that they celebrate somehow around here. I mean, then now they're showing a different version of Washington. I'm just not clear how this is an allowable offense and continuously allowable offense when there's very clear rock and paper and there's some scissor committee that has an obligation to the unsuspecting public of whatever keeps buying their products to feed their commonwealth, and someone lives very high off the hog. I mean, I'm not one of them, but whatever. So there has to be some kind of obligation tied in there somehow. I just don't know where or how. I just don't know why and how dangerously this conversation has moved in such a dramatic way to almost like a traumatizing effect. It's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole, Cattaruzza. It's Earth, Solar System, Milky Way, Universe, Galaxies, Broken. It's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361. And that whole thing with Pixar, and I don't even know, it's Disney Pixar. That's really sticking with me in a very uncomfortable way. Not quite sure. Again, everybody has this all-American viewpoint that they keep pushing, but then they frame themselves as something, some other continent, and then American. I'm just North American, or if I have to, then European American, but that's it. A little confused why there's so much storytelling about a different continent with a very aggressive, abrasive over an undertone in some like challenge or competition that nobody's really talking about, that's really going on behind closed doors, or in some kind of quantum vibrational shift of some sort. It's February 12th, 2022, and I saw this movie, or I saw the beginning of this movie this morning. I think it's The Schulmans or Dinner with Schulman, something like that. I couldn't even find it again. It was 2010. It was a small clip, and it had something to do with taxidermy and the mice. And I did have a tie-in with the Mouse House in the old whaling town that I grew up in, or I was moved to after they moved me from the fallout shelter to this small whaling town. And inside that small, tiny whaling village, they had a whaling museum, and they had something called Sweet Street, which is a candy shop, and they also had the Mouse House, which had tiny taxidermied mice that were with hand clothed whatever. And then there was like a gigantic dollhouse and whatever. That was the licorice root version of what was available in this 19th century going into 20th century at my level. It's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361. I'm still in fallout shelter. It's posted.